Hello darlings, and welcome back to my channel and my series ranking all of the shooters I can find from the 7th console generation. If you'll remember, last episode we left off with Dark Sector topping the list for our best shooter of the generation, something I can't imagine goes on much longer, followed up closely by Soldier of Fortune Payback in last, and in dead middle, Turning Point Fall of Liberty. Also, before we go much further, please like, subscribe, leave a comment down below, and share this video if you do enjoy it. And also be sure to check out my Patreon, where you can help support me on this channel, vote on what you want to see from video essays, and even help decide what games I play next for this series, and also help me buy these games, because I don't know if anybody else out there has tried collecting 360 games lately, but for some reason the price has spiked on a lot of games, even the bad ones, and I really want to take a look at some of them for this series. With all of that garbage out of the way, let's get into the first of today's games that are being ranked. First up is a game I was always curious about, but somehow never got around to, despite being absolutely obsessed with Bionicles as a child. Bionicle Heroes is one of the weirdest games I think I'll play for this series. Based on the LEGO line, Heroes came out only a year or so after Traveler's Tales' first LEGO Star Wars game, so it's no surprise that it carries with it many of the hallmarks of their LEGO series, including swappable characters with unique abilities, collecting LEGO sets, building and exploding LEGO objects, and collecting lots of LEGO pieces as currency. Except, unlike the kid-friendly action of Traveler's Tales' other games, this is a kid-friendly third-person shooter. When I first started playing, the perspective and laser sight reminded me of Resident Evil 4, but once I got acclimated to the controls, I found all the aiming is done through lock-on. Resident Evil 4, more like Resident Evil for babies. It's hard to talk about this game in depth because there really is no depth. It is extremely linear and very simple. Once you finish the first stage, you've basically seen the gameplay loop for the next 6 to 8 hours. You solve very basic puzzles, seeking out collectibles if you're nasty, hold down the fire button to make things go boom, and grow frustrated that you have to replay every stage to 100% the game because some characters aren't available until the very, very end. And in truth, I understand why the game is so simple. This is a game for kids, an alternative for parents to reach to if they don't want their 7-year-old pounded into the ground in some Gears of War online. The enemy variety doesn't really matter because they all die the same, and the boss fights are incredibly repetitive and needlessly drawn out. But I would be lying if I said I wouldn't have had a blast playing it as a child, so I get why it's brain dead easy. What I don't get is why the world of the game is so bland and does no justice to the Bionicle brand. In talking about presentation, I should say the game looks pretty good. The Bionicles themselves animate well, the environments are nicely detailed, and despite being a series of glorified hallways and different biomes, the unique environmental effects are pretty nice and do a good job of breaking up the visuals in fun and interesting ways. But in most other ways, the presentation falls flat. The game opens with a terribly choppy pre-rendered cutscene that has a Matoran giving Toa Jaller an overview of the story, and then players are just given a gun and told to go shoot. While this approach works for most shooters, this is all the story you'll get, period. Each level is bookended by some pantomime cutscenes featuring the Paraka, echoing the voiceless style of the early LEGO games, but the approach is so ill-fitting for this universe. Far be it from me to take something like Bionicle too seriously, but I am serious when I say this game is such a missed opportunity to explore one of the most fascinating fictional worlds ever made for kids media. Bionicle mainstays like Borak, Rakshi, Vizorak, and more all make appearances, along with some major antagonists outside of the Paraka, but with no context, dialogue, or meaningful story cutscenes. The game is just a conveyor belt of targets to shoot at. I can deal with the game being repetitive, but in taking this awkward comedic approach to the source material, it's also bland. However, I still also played the entire thing and had a great time. There's something zen about the mindlessness here, and the game doles out upgrades, achievements, and new areas in equal amounts, giving just enough incentive to keep grinding. And it really is a game where you don't so much play it as grind through it. The puzzles aren't complex enough to warrant even the slight brain power of most LEGO games, and it is an entirely solo experience, unlike the typical LEGO co-op. So if for some reason this game sounds interesting, I recommend finding a nice long podcast or two to pound through as you explore the island. So, it's almost insultingly easy and a bad use of the Bionicle lore. Yeah? Am I blinded by my deep and unwavering love for the Bionicle license? Maybe. Can I recommend it? Kinda. It's totally mindless, and sometimes that's totally fine. It's no Dark Sector, but I certainly had a better time here than some of the other games I've played, nostalgia goggles and all, placing it right under Dark Sector for the time being. Next up on our list is Battleship. Now, if you're thinking to yourself, hey, Battleship is a board game, why am I looking at a first-person shooter? It's because 2012's Battleship is a movie tie-in. Yes, it is based on the movie based on the board game. As we all remember, Battleship the movie starred beloved and Oscar-nominated film star Rihanna, with a bit part by the guy who played Qui-Gon Jinn, and was about an alien invasion being thwarted by US propaganda. But none of that matters because none of the actors are in this game. In fact, there's barely a story at all, and from everything I've laid out already, you'd expect this game to be pretty shit, right? Well, then I am just as shocked as you are to be here to say that not only is 2012's Battleship a pretty fun game, but it might actually be a better use of the license than the abysmal movie it's based on. Battleship might look like a generic shooter, and it is, and a plain one at that. There are only a handful of island environments, some of which get reused multiple times. There are only 5 weapons and 3 enemy types. You move from objective to objective with little to no story or narrative to break up the action. But Battleship has a few things that actually make it a blast to play through. See, while you're playing through this simple shooter, you're also playing Battleship? Kinda. As you fight across the island levels, the sea around you are filled with a variety of battleships engaged in real-time combat with alien ships, all of which can be controlled RTS style with the click of the left bumper. And it bears emphasizing that this all happens in real time. When you command a ship from one side of the island to the other, you can often look over the coast and see it moving. The sense of scale you feel while watching these massive cruisers pelt each other in the ocean is just really neat and gives the world a feeling of life and depth despite a lack of real narrative investment. The placement of the ships can also affect the moment-to-moment first-person gameplay, offering a variety of airstrikes, each different depending on the ship, available to use against enemies on the ground. And likewise, the enemies you defeat on the ground feed into the RTS sections. While using the RTS interface, you can utilize wildcards found from fallen enemies to boost stats on each ship, or take direct control to launch an all-out assault on alien ships. Unfortunately, these assaults are incredibly basic and not much fun after the first time. That being said, switching between the two styles works surprisingly well, and intense sea fights can create a nice sense of urgency in the middle of frenetic firefights on the ground. Speaking of firefights, the shooting itself, while basic, is actually pretty satisfying. The weapons have a nice weight and feedback, and headshots, while still T-rated, explode in a shower of sparks and metal as you crunch into the alien helmets. It reminds me a lot of Destiny, and it's just as satisfying as it is there. The enemies, while limited in variety, do a good job of varying encounters, with large bruisers that will rush at you, drawing your attention and moving you from cover, while standard assault units and snipers take aim. The snipers in particular deserve mentioning, as they might be some of the best dodging AI I've seen in a video game. I played on the hardest difficulty, and I had to swear more than once as I died due to a sniper dodging out of the way of my scope as I let off a shot. But I was never frustrated, just impressed. I'm convinced some member of the team worked on Halo at some point. In fact, I'm convinced every member of this team was ridiculously talented. For all intents and purposes, this game should be abysmal. It feels like it was made in 6 months, no surprise there, between the reused environments and slim weapon and enemy numbers. But it feels like it was also made by a team that knew the restrictions they had to work within and took the chance to make a fun, satisfying shooter that focused on polishing the important parts of an FPS like weapon handling and enemy behavior while putting a fun, truly Battleship-flavored spin on the genre. The game got pretty negative reviews when it came out, and I can see why. It's ridiculously short, has next to no replay value, no multiplayer, it looks pretty average, and has no real narrative to get invested in. But for my money, Battleship is an underrated gem. A proof of concept for blending FPS and RPG elements in a way that conveyed an epic scale while still providing some tense firefights. I'd love to have seen what could be done with this formula with the ideas like the ships, the wildcard system, the enemies, and the weapon selection expanded, but it wasn't meant to be. Instead, I'm glad I got to have such an unexpectedly good time with the game we got. Battleship is better than Turning Point Fall of Liberty, not quite as good as Bionicle Heroes. After GoldenEye, the 007 licensing game saw a glut of other attempts to recapture the glory of the rare N64 shooter, and pretty much all failed. There were, however, a handful of interesting and good games left in the series, and despite hearing about it as a mediocre shooter, I think Quantum of Solace is one of those good games. It deserves to be said up front that Quantum of Solace is a greatest hits collection of tropes from the early 360 era of shooters. Quantum of Solace has it all. We've got annoying QTEs, which stands for quick time events for the children in the audience. We've got stealth sequences with every guard conveniently facing away from you, ill-timed and ill-paced minigames that feel like little more than gimmicks, and even third-person cover shooting that gets the job done but just isn't quite as good as Gears of War. And despite all these trappings, I actually had a fair amount of fun with Quantum of Solace because of the incredibly solid bones it's built on. Developed by Treyarch in 2007, which, by the way, can we marvel at Treyarch likely developing parts of this concurrently with World at War and the first Black Ops? Quantum of Solace, like those games, is made with the same Call of Duty engine, and it shows. From weapon handling to level design, this feels closer to a Call of Duty game than most imitators from the era, and is better for it. The gunplay is quick and accurate, the enemies fall in a reasonable amount of hits, and you have all the standard implements of the COD gameplay arsenal, including ducking, sprinting, aiming down sights, and grenades. There are even mission briefing screens a la Modern Warfare, spiced up with more spy-looking graphic design to stay with the pulpy feel of the Bond series. However, in an effort to differentiate this game from Treyarch's other shooters, and probably also get their money's worth out of the best model of a Daniel Craig action figure the Xbox 360 could muster, Quantum of Solace is also a cover shooter. The cover system is the real bone of contention here. It changes the environments from what might otherwise be linear Call of Duty style of the era into a more Gears of War pace. Waist-high debris is strewn around environments, conveniently offering players subtle ways to push forward the front line against waves of enemies. The enemies, like Gears of War, do a good job of flanking and trying to draw you out of cover with grenades, but combined with the small arena-like levels, this makes for more of a pop-and-shoot style shooting gallery, which can get boring after a while. This is the biggest problem with the game, as it removes a lot of the gameplay flexibility that made that era of Call of Duty games so frenetic. It also does that annoying thing old Call of Duty does where you flinch when you get hit, which means you'll take plenty of unintended deaths on the hardest setting even when you have an enemy dead in your sights. Quantum of Solace features the standard military shooter mix of shotguns, sniper rifles, and automatic rifles, but does an interesting job of spicing them up by only giving the goons you kill a limited selection depending on the level, forcing you to use an MP5 or an M16, etc. It's a good way to make sure the player never gets too bored with a bland weapon variety, but it's regrettable they weren't able to spice things up any further. I completely understand that this was more likely due to the Bond license trying to appeal to more gritty sensibilities at the time, but I would have really loved some wacky gadgets and gizmos. That being said, there are a few high-powered weapons hidden in cases throughout the game that add some nice punch to firefights. It's not a laser wristwatch, but I'll take what I can get. The game's story is, well, it's there. You follow Bond through mixed-up events from both Casino Royale and Quantum of Solace, and while the shooting and firefights are interesting enough if you can put up with the restrictive cover system, some other parts of Quantum of Solace's mixture hasn't aged nearly as well. In fact, you could say it left me shaken, not stirred. Stupid jokes aside, this game does its best to put players in Bond's shoes, including through some very awkward QTEs. There are parkour sections that play out like balancing beams, long quick-time fights that can be instantly failed, and extended periods of just watching action play out like the first-person sequence in a bulldozer that just not controlled by the players at all. These sequences are made more awkward by the constant change in camera perspective from first to third person and back, zooming in and out of Bond's cranium like my thoughts on the inherent eroticism of Eva Green's existence. But for all the problems with the camera switching, the game also makes good use of the camera switching with stylish, comic book style cutaways that show multiple perspectives. It's a neat technical trick made all the more impressive by only slight occasional frame rate dips. The environments also deserve some credit. Quantum of Solace sports some beautiful and detailed environments that help sell the exotic adventure of a Bond movie. While there are a few drab office interiors and industrial areas, the environmental variety overall is nice, and the areas themselves feel well considered, full of cover and objects that Bond can shoot to get a leg up, like fire extinguishers, fuse boxes, chandeliers, and exploding barrels. The game also strays from linear corridors for more open-ended stealth sequences that involve sneaking around guards and disabling cameras. It's a very simple stealth system, but effective at utilizing Bond's skill set for the player and adds to the already solid gameplay variety. The environments themselves also play into some of the game's best set pieces, including a standout firefight late in the game set inside a collapsing and flooding construction site in Venice. What this game lacks in narrative cohesion, it does an admirable job of making up for with thrilling and varied vignettes. Honestly, I found myself enjoying this game overall just because of how well it made me feel like a real movie action hero. From the over-the-top and varied enemy death animations that will see them throwing themselves over balconies or getting clotheslined by bullets, to the quick-time takedown animations where Bond beats henchies like they owe Britain a colony. There's so much over-the-top action movie goodness to enjoy, and I'd be lying if I said that classic Bond music didn't get the blood flowing in the middle of intense firefights. So it's far from perfect, but Quantum of Solace manages to be a solid, satisfying, and brief shooter with an interesting spin on some well-worn tropes. Doesn't leave much of an impact compared to its contemporaries, but for what it is, it's fun, it's solid, and it makes you feel like James Bond even in brief, stylish doses. I also want to mention the unlockable galleries featuring storyboards, assets, and more that players can walk around in and enjoy, which is a nice treat for someone like me who misses games giving players fun ways to unlock and enjoy concept art. Altogether, I think that puts Quantum of Solace at the top of the pack for now, even if it might not take much to knock it from its perch. And I think that about does it for this video. As always, thank you very much for watching, and let me know what you think of these games if you've played them, and what you think of the rankings so far down below. As always, again, if you have any suggestions on what to play next, let me know down in the comments, and be sure to check out my Patreon once more. As low as $1 a month, you can be listed alongside other patrons as producers on my videos. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you all next time.